Thank you for joining Viet UX-PM Ask Me Anything number 2. Today we have a very special guest speaker. Let me introduce him a little bit later. But before we started, we are Viet UX-PM. And for those who don't know about us, Viet UX-PM is a global community of Vietnamese people who love building products. We welcome all backgrounds, including product managers, UX designer, startup founders, or everyone who loves building products. So today, Ask Me Anything, the format basically is we're going to have a guest speaker and you can ask anything, any topic that related to the speaker domain of expertise. It's my very honor to introduce today, we have an awesome guest speaker from Silicon Valley. His name is Mick Johnson. Mick Johnson is currently a current director of product at Google and previously presumed the role of director of product at Facebook, as well as founded multiple startups. So before we start today, I'm sure that we have a lot of questions submitted to Mick before, but we also gonna welcome live questions from all of you. And for those who are joining us from on Zoom, when the time comes, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and also ask the question directly to Mick. For those who join us on Facebook or YouTube live stream, you can also chat on the questions, or you can also interact. The better way to do is to interact with us directly on Slido. So let me read to you how to interact to us. If you join us on mobile, on browser, just go ahead and type sli.do/VietUXPM. We also post the link in the chat right now on YouTube and Facebook and Zoom. You can go ahead and click on that. So right now there is a pool we're opening right now to basically we want to know, where are you joining us from? Go ahead and type the city that you're joining us from. We would like to know, where are you and which time zone are you? Chicago, Ho Chi Minh City. Mick, I'm not sure if you've been to Vietnam, but a lot of people coming from Vietnam and joining us today, and it is 10 p.m. their time. So wow. Really appreciate all of you joining us this late.
Actually, I have been to Vietnam a couple of times. I went through there as a young man backpacking, and then I actually took my wife there on our honeymoon because I liked it so much. So.
Oh my God! Which city? Which place did you visit last time?
We spent a little time in the south, and then we spent a little time in Hoi An in the middle. Very pretty little town.
Yeah. Awesome! I love Hoi An. I love it. We have a couple of people joining from Tokyo. Nick, I think you've been to Tokyo too, right?
Yeah, I lived in Japan for a couple of years. Spent a lot of time in Tokyo. I see someone here saying they're also in Sydney, which is also where I spent a lot of time. So,
awesome. Are you from Sydney originally?
I'm from a place called Townsville in northeastern Australia. And then I went to Sydney University.
Awesome. Yeah, we have some people from Boston, Seattle in the US, from Singapore and Hanoi. And then Haiphong, a coastal province in Vietnam in the north, San Jose, Philadelphia, San Diego, Evanston, Illinois. Cool. Sounds like a good representative of the globe. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and we are very excited. Without further ado, let me introduce Mick Johnson officially. And Mick, would you like to introduce a little bit to the audience about you and one fun fact maybe about you that we should know?
Sure. Xin chào. Tôi tên là Mick. That's my terrible pronunciation, but I'm sorry. So I grew up in northeastern Australia. I've lived in a few places. I've done a reasonable amount of work both in product management in large companies and in founding smaller startups. Fun fact about me, when I was living in Japan, I was very into karate back then, and so I used to teach little kids combined classes of karate and English, which was some of the most fun that I ever had. So,
that's awesome. That's awesome. Are you still practicing karate?
I do kickboxing now, mostly to keep fit. I don't fight in tournaments anymore.
Well, awesome. So, Mick, I'm sure we have a full agenda today. Let us get into it. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, awesome. So, the very first question we want to ask you, Mick, early back in the day of your career, I know that you started with a computer science degree, right? And then you went ahead. How do you discover product management? Is it by chance or by choice, or who advised you, or what's your path to product management?
It was completely by chance. I did not know what being a PM was. I had no idea about it, and I really just fell into it. So I'd done a degree in computer science. I'd shifted actually into a marketing role because I knew I wanted to do something a little bit closer to people. But back then I was working for a startup in Sydney, and I didn't know what product management was. So I was like, marketing, that sounds more like people. I'll spend some time there, and spent a lot of time writing press releases and case studies and things like that. But kind of fell into doing PM, right? Then when I moved to Silicon Valley and started a startup, I mean, really the job of being a founder is quite similar to being a PM, right? You don't have any resources. You need to persuade people to help you. You have to think really hard about what it is, what unmet need might exist in the world, and what a great solution to that might be, right? Like a lot of the job is essentially product. And so when I got acqui-hired into Facebook, that was the first time I officially had the job of a PM, but I had no idea what the job was. I really had no idea whatsoever. And I felt like a complete imposter because I was looking around and everyone seemed to know what they were doing. So I just follow people and see what they did and thought, okay, I guess that's what a PM does. And one of the things I realized quite a bit later when I was managing the rotational PM program is that no one has any idea what a PM is, right? It's one of those strange roles which really is about, like earned leadership and doing what your team needs and figuring out where the gaps are, as opposed to, a specific hard skill like accounting or law or, even technical design and things like that, right? And so it's one of the, in my opinion, it is a skill set that you build up by doing rather than by formally learning at a university or a course. Although there are many great resources out there, ultimately I think the core of being a PM is about something when you do it.
That led me to the second question. So make a lot of the audience today, they join and they are not currently a PM. They may be just starting to learn about it, or they have approached some of the resources online and offline. What is the best advice for people who are in the position of exploring the path of PM? What do you think they should start learning or doing in order to transition or pivot into PM someday?
It's a really good question. I'm going to split it up into two pieces. One is around like motivations and the other is skills. So I've spent a decent amount of my time chatting with folks who think they want to be a PM. And then I ask them why, and they say, because I get to make all the decisions. And then I break them into the sad truth that as a PM, it's very rare that you get to make the decisions. A lot of your job is trying to help decisions get made, but it's extremely rare that you actually get to make the decisions. You have far more control over the things that actually happen as an engineer or a designer or something else, right? Like that's actually where you can decide what to do. Being a PM is this role where you are trying to bring in all the pieces and try and ensure that a good decision gets made. But 9 out of 10 decisions I don't get to make. I get to help other people sometimes make, and maybe sometimes if I've earned enough credibility with the team in the case where there's really no clear answer, then I can make the decision. But it's by far the exception, not the rule. And so that is one of the things to do, is to try and understand why you might want to do it. Whereas on the other side, if the things that make you excited are really just like, what is the thing that could be built? how can I get together with a group of people and try and help bring them together in a team? How can I help people see not just what the first version of this might be, but the 10th version or the 100th version of this might be? If all of that stuff excites you, then it's probably a good career for you. But the desire to like be a decision maker rarely works out well. The second is skill sets. And so one of the things I used to advise people to do, and it depends where you are in terms of how possible this is, but try building something, right? If there's a local hackathon, if there's a local group where people get together, and like one of the things I did was this thing called Startup Bus. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Have you ever heard of this, Ian? So it was this kind of crazy project where there's a festival in Austin every year, except for this year, called South by Southwest. And what they would do is there would be 40 people who got on a bus in San Francisco, and the bus would take 3 days to get from San Francisco to Austin, Texas. And in that 3 days, you had to form a team and build a product. Right, so it's like a 3-day hackathon on a bus. And it's really a very good way to determine, it's kind of like the life cycle of a thing, which is, okay, who should I work with? And let's have the early debates about what we build. And then let's try and design something in the next 3 hours. And then let's try and build the terrible first version of it. And then discover the things that don't work. And then try and go out and raise some awareness of it. And then there's a pitch competition at the end. And ultimately, it was unimportant as to whether the thing that you built actually, got made. I ended up doing some back-end programming for a little thing when I did it. But what it really showed me is that experience and the like discussions and challenges and debates and things that you need to overcome inside that short period of time is a really good way to see whether like people get value from listening to you, get value from you helping them make decisions, basically, right? Like it's a good way to do it. And so if you're at a larger company and they do hackathons, that's a good way. If there's a local community of makers and they do things, that can be a good way. The other thing I used to look for, and this is transitioning into a different thing, is like people who like building things that are not even software. Right. So we used to find people who used to get together and, just build a little project, whether it was, a little, what do you call those things, like a little toy racing car or, a shed that they built with some friends or, a little hideout or something like that. Right. Like just honestly, the craft of building anything tends to evoke the same sorts of problems. Right.
That's awesome. This reminds me about a day when one time when I was still in Vietnam, I joined a hackathon for 3 days as well. And I think I was, I don't really remember the project idea, but I think the whole experience really worthwhile to join. 3 days, very exhausted. You end up not sleeping that much. You're still thinking about your project and you think about your presentation, why your prototype is not ready. So everything is very stressful. But at the end of the day, you make friends and you learn about how to build a real product. I mean, even in the very basic terms of that. I think it speaks volume to a lot of people think about product management. They think about, oh, I'm gonna work for a big company. I'm gonna have a degree. A lot of people actually approach me and say, do I have to have an MBA like you to start to be a PM? I think the answer, like you said, everybody can start and frame their career to be a PM if they think they are the person that are suitable for PM, and they just learn by doing it, right? Just dive right in and start learning from now. That's very good advice. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and switching gears a little bit, Mick, can you tell us a little bit about your startup experience? I know a couple of people in the audience also startup founders or working at startups right now. How can you summarize that experience of running a company with a lot of money, thinking about building product from a startup founder perspective? And what the advice you can give for startup founders?
Sure. So I think startups are amazing. They are not a way to make money, in my opinion. And so a quick piece on terminology. When I say startup, I mean a company that you found that is designed to grow really, really big, right? A company that is designed to get to 1 billion users or multiple $1 billion a year in revenue, right? Like that's what I think of as a startup. There are also small businesses, and small businesses can make you, tens of millions of dollars a year. That's great. They can be amazing things, but that's not quite the same as a startup. If your goal is to start a business and run a business, there's many ways to do it, right? Including starting small and bootstrapping and building your way up. But startups are kind of a different breed. Now, some of the things that I'll talk about in startups also apply to just founding and running a business. But it's kind of the most intense version of that. So I've done really 2 startups, although both of them had multiple iterations along the way. The first was when I founded a gas bag, which was our little gas price finder on iPhone, and ended up being successful far more than we thought. But it was myself and my co-founder James, and another chap called Alex North, who became co-founder in my second startup. And 2 or 3 of us, and we really didn't pay ourselves any money whatsoever. And we raised, 50 grand from an angel here in Silicon Valley. And we used to pay ourselves $1,500 a month and lived in terrible, tiny apartments in Mountain View and only buy rice when it was cheap and all those sorts of things, right? And hope that we would make it big. And so, we never hired any employees. We never really became that successful. It ended up in a little, split acqui-hire to Facebook and Zynga, and that was great. And that's also when we went through Y Combinator. But that's like the very smallest variant of a startup, right? And we tried a number of different products along the way and turns and iterations. And I would say the thing that we learned there more than anything else is that founding and running a startup, being a founder, will teach you far more about yourself than anything else ever will, except maybe having kids. Having kids teaches you other things as well. But it just, the primary problem that you have with a startup is not that people hate you or think that your idea is bad. They just don't care. Right? And so you are day after day, month after month, year after year, trying to assert your vision into the void of a mass of disinterested people and try to understand what is the thing that will unlock it. And it is just, emotionally and physically draining after a while, right? Because you're searching for product market fit, and it feels like a good product to you, and you can't understand why it's not taking off. And you have to really dig down inside and understand what it is. And all the things you talked about, the exhaustion, the excitement, the thinking about it, the trying to launch too soon, all of that stuff exists. And it is just one of the greatest tools for self-discovery that I've never seen. And so one of the things I always tell people is, if you think you want to do a startup, then do a startup, because that is the best way to discover whether it is for you. And at the early part of your career, and it sounds like for several people on this call, they are at the early stages of your career, the most important thing is kind of the slope, right? It's the trajectory. And one of the greatest influences on trajectory is your ability to learn about yourself and to build new skills, right? And that's why I think doing startups at the start of your career, even if you put off, earning money at a big company for a year or 2, the skills that you will build along the way, the networks that you will make along the way, the things you'll learn about yourself that you do along the way will serve you in far greater stead for the rest of your career. It certainly has for me. The second flavor of startups that I did was when I'd actually, been at Facebook for a while and had a pedigree and had all the things to tick the boxes in VC firms in Silicon Valley. And we went out and raised, a couple of $1 million and hired a bunch of people, and tried to build a business and, did okay, honestly. Didn't do that well. I ended up shutting that business down, but still the lessons were the same, right? We got up to 14 people, I think, on staff at the high rate, but still the core learnings were really about the internal piece, right? That's the reason that I think startups are so amazing. And so to all the folks out there, if you're thinking about doing it, I can't recommend it highly enough as a thing to do.
Do you so you mentioned in your bio around you have to shut down your company when you move to Google.
Yep.
If I were you, I don't know if I can go about and do that decision. You have company, you have team, you're passionate about your product. Killing your own product or selling it to somebody is a bittersweet, I think, experience. Can you talk about that and your decision to move from startup to big companies like Facebook and Google?
Well, the first time it was easy.
Well,
my co-founder and I hadn't really made any money in 2 years. So like, what? We get a salary? This is amazing. And we were also, and I don't know how much this will resonate for folks here, but startups are a little bit of the almost the back door in to some things, because I went to Sydney University, which is a good university, but it's not like an Ivy League university over here, right? And so startups were kind of my way into the big tech world, right? Because I got into Y Combinator, which really just cares about the product that you're building and doesn't care where you went to school or any of those things, right? And then that was enough to then get me into Facebook. And then once I was in Facebook, right, it was good. So it was a big step up for us at that time. And it was a bit challenging because also that company, the tech, got acquired by Zynga and we had to close it down. And it was shortly after the earthquake in Japan, or an earthquake in Japan back then. And so folks were using our passive location tracking stuff to actually, look for people and find people and family members and things like that, right? So there's a lot of emotional things going on. But almost always the question is, will you build greater things moving forward in this new company versus what you could for where you are? And I think there's, probably a term many of you have heard, which or aware of, which is the sunk cost fallacy. Yeah, right. So it's like all the things that you've done up until now, you need to ignore them. It's hard to do emotionally, but you just need to think, in this new role, in this new place, can I build things that will be amazing for the world, even if they're different to my initial vision? And at that time, I was working on Facebook Mobile, and there seemed all sorts of amazing things that we could do, right? And I was certainly very sad to wrap up that part of my life, but I was also excited about the future. The second time was really hard because I had basically decided I was never going to work for a big company again. And so I left Facebook, and I spent maybe 6 months trying to decide if this was really the thing that I wanted to build. The company that I wanted to build was called Lexi. It was aimed at eliminating the language barrier. It's a thing that I'm still very passionate about. I left a decent amount of money on the table when I left Facebook, and I swore I'd never go back. And one of the things that happened for me, and I think will happen, for many folks, is kind of that evolving balance in terms of, how much value you find in your life from the products that you create, how much value you find in your life from the family and lifestyle that you have, and how much value you have in your life from the work community and the folks that surround you, right? And so certainly for the earlier parts of my life, I was very focused on the former. What is the thing that I can build, right? And then, you get a bit older, you have some kids, and you realize, oh, actually there are greater things that can be built. And one of the things that, was also transformative for me was running a thing called the rotational PM program at Facebook, where we were working with folks who were very early in their careers. And essentially, while I was running my startup, I got to see multiple folks that I had managed and guided through that program break out on their own and start, driving their own startups and doing really well. And kind of what that reminded me is that a large thing that I really enjoy is managing people and growing them. Like growing products is great, and growing people is also really great. And it takes a while, honestly, until you realize that the latter is true, and it's just as hard. And then that honestly was one of the things that led me to feel, okay, I can go back to a big company. And yes, I will build great products. I think I actually found a really fascinating domain to work on at Google. And I didn't realize from the outside how much fun being a PM at Google is. It honestly doesn't have a very good brand, in my opinion, in product management. Yeah, because people look at Google products and they're like, well, they're okay, but they're not obviously the best consumer products out there, right? Maybe 10 years ago, sure, but now I'm not sure. But there's so much great stuff going on that you just don't see from the outside. But I was also really excited about, managing folks again, right? And managing particularly PMs again, and helping them think about how to grow in this domain, right? And so that was one of the things that made it easier. But honestly, it was pretty hard.
Interesting, very, very interesting perspective. I think at the Valley, I thought that, you know, being a PM at Google is the thing that people go after, right? A lot of people go after. But anyway, can you tell us a little bit more about your current role at Google? You are clearly one of the leaders of the PM org there. You are leading a team. Can you tell us a bit about your current product, as well as the team, how many people are in the team you are managing, and a little bit of tips or advice around how does it look like leading a big team in such a big company like Google?
Sure. So I'll tell you a little bit about my role and team, and all the thing. I'm kind of limited in the things that I can say
Sure.
to be non-material information and things that you can know publicly. But I lead a team called Geo Automotive, and what we're doing is we're putting a version of maps into cars. Now, you've been able to do this for a couple of ways for a long time. If you buy a new car these days, you can often get an embedded navigation thing, right? They normally look terrible and don't have live traffic and things like that. Or you can connect your phone. And there you can have Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever running on it. And so we are doing the former, but for Google Maps. So it's actually running on the Android operating system, running on the head unit in the car, and then it integrates directly with the car. So that lets us do a few fun things, and we can know the battery level of the car. We can predict the battery level on arrival. We can project to multiple screens. We can start to do things if you're in a hybrid car. And we know where you're going, we can tell the powertrain where you're going so that it knows when to use the battery and when to use the internal combustion engine to improve efficiency. If you think about it, cars have always effectively been mechanical systems. They have some electronic pieces in it, but it's not really a computer. And essentially, I see that transition coming to automotive as well, in the same way that phones were communication devices for a long time, but they weren't particularly good at it. I think that cars have been driving devices for a long time, and I also don't think they're that good at it. So I think the very way in which you drive a car over the next 10 years is going to change fundamentally. I actually don't believe it will be L4 autonomy and self-driving cars where you can fall asleep, but I think that the way that you make decisions will become safer and easier and far less stress on every single time you get in the car. So that's what we're working on. The organization that I manage is about 10 people. I have one manager on my team, and they manage about half of them. That's a team in Sydney, and then a few other folks who report to me directly. And that relates to an engineering team of about 90 folks, right, across engineering and design and so on. Wow. And so often what you have in PM is this idea of a wake. There's like the small group that you manage directly, and then there's the broader set of folks that you influence, right? So maybe you're a PM on a team and you don't manage anyone directly, but there's 3, 5, 8, 9 engineers and a designer or an analyst that you influence. So that's kind of the size. If you think about that in terms of Google, there's about 3,000 PMs at Google. I think there's 240 directors of product, I would guess, like in that kind of order of things. So I'm a kind of a small fish, which is fine. I really like being where I am. Within Geo, kind of Google Maps and Google Earth and things like that, there's about 3,000 people total, maybe 20 directors of product, something like that. And so that actually feels like a company. So that's kind of the world that I'm in. Was the second part of the question what it's like to manage that team, or where would you like to go from there? That's more like what it is. What
is this like? What's the challenge of being a director of product when you're not in the one who execute anymore? What's the challenge of leading them, talking about the strategy, lining folks together to achieve what you want to achieve? I mean, just a little bit about. I mean, we're not on Monday. We're not on the work mode right now. But just tell me a little bit of your day to day. What's the biggest challenge there? How do you overcome those challenges?
So at least half of my job is just people management, right? And so all the folks on my team are really, really great at where they are in their career. And so a large part of my job is to first understand where they're at, and second, set them up with coaching and opportunities to help them grow. And so I have a general rule, which is for anyone in my org they should spend about 50% of their time doing what they're good at, and about 50% of their time doing what they're not good at, right? And that's the best way to learn. And so almost all management challenges come when someone is too much in one bucket or the other. If they're always in the place where they're doing too much of what they're already good at, they tend not to be growing. They tend not to, their performance scores won't be sufficiently high because they're not stretching themselves, they're not moving. And if they're doing too much of what they're not good at, and it might be product design, it might be communications, it might be empathy and people skills, who knows what it is, then they'll be running into roadblocks, right? And so a lot of your job is to try and understand what they're good at, where they need to grow, and communicate that to them in a way that resonates. Now, communication doesn't necessarily mean, hey, by the way, you don't seem very good at this thing. That's rarely the way to do it. A lot of what you have to do is try and structure the narrative for the area and the product such that people can see for themselves what is it that their part is not currently doing. And that is also the harder thing, I would say, about managing PMs as opposed to managing a team of engineers, is that you need to kind of like give people enough space so that they have like scope, not just the scope of what they're doing, but they're doing this much, and you need to give them enough space that it could grow to be this much at the same time as someone over here is doing this much, and it could grow to be that much, right? And that kind of like placing people in areas of interesting thinking is such that they can continue to grow is really hard. And it's particularly hard often because the engineering team isn't necessarily aligned like that. Like a lot of what happens at my role is you come in and you have a team that's been building things, for a while in a certain way, and it's not actually what the market needs. And you can't go, all right, we need to stop that team over here, stop that team over here, move them all. It never works like that. You have, and that, to your question, like what's one of the hardest things, you need to understand the organization and the culture that you're in, right? Again, what it's good at, what it's not good at. Right? Google is very good at thinking long and deliberately and in detail about a given problem. And it is very bad at making decisions quickly or enduring any form of conflict, right? So there's an interesting cultural piece there about how organizations make decisions and how much conflict is appropriate. But essentially, when I came in, it was very clear some of the pieces that need to go, but we're still putting them in place 2 years later. And that's a large part of my job.
Thank you for sharing, Mick. This is super helpful to hear from a very different perspective, because I am a product manager, so oftentimes my scope is just within my role, right? But thinking about director level, people manager level, where you have different set of challenge, and obviously you need to have different sets of skills in order to manage effectively the team. So we are about half the hour. Let me give you a quick break, and we are going to have a second question in the poll. For folks joining us today, can you tell us which role are you in currently? Are you a PM? Are you a salesperson? Go ahead and put your answer in there, and so that we can learn a little bit more about you. And Mick, we will come back to you in very shortly.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So we have product manager, we have business analyst, engineers, startup, student. Majority of the audience is PM, 45%. Business analyst, 14%. Engineer, 7%. Startup, 6%. Student, 12%. Well, when I was a student, I have no idea about PM. And 17% student. All right. No one in sales and marketing. People in sales and marketing don't like product, apparently. it's a joke. All right. 50% product manager. Wow. We have very concentrated group of PM today. Awesome. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the poll, and the live question is still on. Go ahead and put your question, but also this is the time that you can ask question directly to Mick. And for those who are in Zoom, we will ask you to please, if you can open your camera as well and unmute yourself and ask question. And then I will also collect questions from other channels and ask Mick in the meantime as well. So on Zoom first, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, guys.
Hi. Hi, and please go ahead and introduce quickly about your name and where you are and what's your question.
This is Alex from
please go first.
Oh, sorry, Alexandra, could you mind go second?
All right, yeah. So let me go first. Hi, Mick. My name is Ngọc, or called Gosha. I'm a PM from Vietnam. I'm currently working for Vietnamese Zillow, something like that. And actually have my, something like, we aspire to be Zillow. So my first question to you would be, actually the one from the list. It's like, how product management overall, like teams, best practices, challenges, or cultural elements, as you just described, differ from in Google from Facebook? Because based on the list, of course, they are the two biggest companies. So it's really interesting for you to hear sharing about how they're alike, how they're different. Thanks.
Sure, sounds good. I'll share a few things. Obviously, Google is also a gigantic company, so different pieces may be there, but hopefully some of these things are useful depending wherever you are. One thing I talked a little bit about already is the speed of decision making. Facebook was very fast at making decisions, had no problem either in the product or in the organization, like almost overnight saying, all right, these 50 people are going over here, right? The second was an understanding of metrics, right? And one of the things that I still think Google is pretty poor at comparatively is real-time understanding of metrics, right? And so the job of being a PM at Facebook, I remember Chris Cox, who was the head of product there. If you ever ran into him and he'd ask, hey, how's the product going? If you didn't know what your DAU and relative metrics were for that day, you did not get any credibility. Like everyone just knew exactly what was going on. I am yet to find a PM at Google who knows the daily active users metrics of that day for their product. And in many cases, it's because you can't get the data. The pipelines are too slow, right? But it's also because there's a lack of interrogatory analysis. Like just understanding a high level number on its own doesn't help. You have to understand what's the composition of users and why are some users more engaged or less retained or happier and so on, right? And Facebook had this amazing, analytics stack that had all been built internally, and outside of the ads and search world, Google doesn't. And so one of the consequences of that is that if you can't evaluate nuanced product decisions using analytical frameworks, then they tend to get debated in terms of opinion and preference. And so one of the things that happens at larger companies without such a analytical background is that making product decisions is more about getting consensus and alignment than it is about putting forth some quantitative hypothesis about what might happen. This is also a pattern that you see in teams where you're doing things well pre-launch. And so that's some of the things that's happening for me is that we could measure some things, but in many cases, the products that we're building are designed to go into cars that are going to be built in a factory 2 years from now, right? And so we can only ever get, estimated metrics. And so you have kind of these properties of the organization. One is about, high conflict and rapid decision making and lots of numbers, and only the numbers matter, and that leads to a certain type of outcome. And the other is, move slowly, be patient, be methodical, build for the long term. Don't worry too much about the numbers. The numbers will sort themselves out, and that leads to a very different sort of decision making. I would say that's one of the big differences.
Follow up that a little bit. Do Google folks see the lacking of quick, rapid decision making or data analytics a problem overall, or they think that it's all right to move on like this? I think it's
there's a spectrum, to be honest. For those of us that have come there from other places, we see the problem maybe to a greater degree, but there's a little bit of you don't know what you don't know. And I would say that the same is true for Facebook as well, right? Like one of the things that happened at Facebook is because decisions got made so quickly, nothing ever got written down. And so that meant that the decisions that you made were always far more tactical than strategic. At Google, decisions take a long time to make, and so you write things down in far more detail. Like you would not find a 5-page document in Facebook describing what it is that you're doing and why, but you find them all the time at Google, right? And it's really interesting product thinking, right? And so sometimes even when they see the problem, they're not sure quite what the solution is or how to get there. And it's effectively management, right? Like what management of an organization or of a culture, of a skill. I know from some of the folks that I know higher up at Google that at the highest level, they see this as a challenge, right? The inability to manage a company and an organization to long-term metrics. But you know, you have to see the problem, you have to understand the problem, you have to have the skills to solve the problem, and then you have to have the opportunity to do it, right, on top of everything else.
Big thanks. Yeah. In that particular term, maybe Vietnamese companies are much more like Facebook, I think. Just a small comment on that one.
Could be, and startups in general, right? So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next,
hey,
please go ahead, Alex.
Oh, sorry.
And for those who join on Zoom, please try to shorten your questions a little bit because we are running out of time. Please go ahead and ask a question.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. Thank you guys for hosting this event. So a question is like, how do you organize an effective collaboration between the tech team and product team, where the product team acts as a partner rather than a dictator, where the product team is interested actually in engaging the tech team? And the reason why I'm asking this question is a little bit different from perspective of Google. It's focused on the companies which are catching up with the market leaders who often copy popular features, and product team is not much focused on the actual collection of the feedback from customer, while rather more on gathering the feedback from the market. Because a lot of features are just copy pasted from Amazon, Google, Facebook, any market leader.
I think there's two questions there. One is about whether, you know, competitors or users have a better idea of where the product needs to go and how to learn from that. And the other is about internal collaboration. I'll focus on the latter. So being a dictator never works. The first time I was a PM, I thought that if I just manage the engineers directly, then, you know, they'd have to do what I said. And then I ran a startup and hired a bunch of engineers and found that even though I managed them directly, they didn't just do what I said. Like, one of the great things about being a PM is that it forces you to learn how to influence and inspire people without having any authority whatsoever, right? You like, the more you act like a dictator, the less likely it is that people are going to follow you, right? So I really think the only way it can work is that you effectively think of these things as centers of gravity, right? So I have this, for example, with any engineering lead that I work with, and that my center of gravity is product thinking. What is important to build? Why is this bit more important to build than that bit? And what are the underlying pieces? And her center of gravity is, how should things be built? What is the hardest way to do it? What are the things that are going to matter most long term? But she has great opinions on product, and I have okay opinions on technical architecture, right? And we both believe that both of us, like, trying to figure out how these pieces align is far more important than either of us getting it right. And the same is true, you know, as you have more people in that leadership group, right? And so as a PM, right, like, seeing your center of gravity as the what and the why of the product is a reasonable thing. But being interested in the technical pieces, like, what is the solution that is 20% worse on the product side, but 5 times easier to build on the technical side? Like, be interested in that stuff, and then conversely, to be interested in the engineering team's opinions on the product and what it works and why, right? That's my thinking.
Thank you, Mick. Vũ, I think you have a question. Please go ahead next.
Yes, thank you. Hey, Mick, very impressive background, and thank you so much for your time. Super interesting conversation. I'm currently at Amazon. My question is kind of a follow-up on the previous question. So my question is, how can you ensure that there are high quality people from other teams to work on your product from the beginning? And if you cannot get the high quality people that you want, from the other teams, how can you improve the quality to make sure the product success?
So is the question how to recruit high quality people, or how to verify that the folks on your team are good? What's the...
You know, not necessarily, because like when I look at other teams like engineering or maybe like even marketing or other teams, that you have no influence, no control, more like influence. So how can you ensure those teams have the high quality people to work on your product?
Oh, geez.
Yeah. It's a really good question. It's one that I have struggled with. A thing that I was bad at for lots of my career was working with people that I didn't think were very good. And this really got me into trouble, right? Like I would have a couple of engineers that I thought were great, and I spent a lot of time with them, and other engineers, if they didn't impress me, I wouldn't spend much time with them. And what I realized was that was a grave oversight on my part, because it meant that I didn't really notice folks who were really good at things, but who were quieter about it, right? Or who had skills that I wasn't paying any attention to because it was happening in some back end piece. Ultimately, there's this concept of a fixed versus a growth mindset that you can apply to yourself, right? Like, how can I become better? And part of being a leader, and I generally think of product management as a leadership role, is seeing that in other people, right? So it's less about like, who are the high quality folks on my engineering team, or my finance team, or the marketing team, and more, what is the best thing for this team that that person can do, right? And you kind of put yourselves in the shoes of their manager and try to understand, like, with the like 50 good at, 50 not good at, like, what is the best thing that they could do? And then see if you can help nudge them into that. Now that works best if you can then have a conversation with their manager, who's probably your peer, and say, hey, it seems like, you know, this person seems to be really good at that, but less good at that. Are they in this role because you want them to learn that? Right? And then you're kind of setting yourself up in like this shared like management kind of role, as opposed to thinking, hey, I need something more from this person. Because you'll find that any engineering manager or design manager is also like trying to assign stretch opportunities to their folks. I know it's not quite that same answer to your question, but it is just, it's a thorny like kind of situation to be in. I've been in it a bunch of times myself, and every time the answer has been talking about management with their manager to try and understand what the right path for them is. So
thank you very much.
Next, I think I saw Hoài Trần, you have a question? If you do, please go ahead and ask Mick. Okay. Everybody, you can go ahead and unmute yourself in Zoom if you want to ask a question for Mick.
Hi, Mick. I'm Cường from Chicago. I watched your talk in YouTube, and I see that the PM usually have a work with uncertain situation. Can you give us some advice for navigating into that situation? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for watching it. If I recall correctly, it was about making good decisions with uncertain information, right? And so one of the things that I generally think about PM is that if you wait until you have all of the information you need to make a good decision, you're too late, right? And so one of the things is to try and learn over time, like, what's the minimum set of information that you need to still make a good decision. And that is part of why I think the domain of PM is so interesting, right? Because a large part of the time, what you're trying to do is not understand, hey, what features does this product have or that product have, but more fundamentally, like, as a human being, what are the things that I want to do, am interested in, am not interested in, even independent of what the product is, right? And so for me, a large part of what I do when I'm testing particularly consumer products is try to understand how bored I get with something over time, right? Let's say you have a product and you build a feature and you think it's the best feature ever because you helped to design it. you are inherently going to be biased over whether it's actually valuable or not. So you have to put yourself in regular situations every day and just find out yourself whether you use it or not, right? And you have to try and have a deep enough understanding of yourself and your motivations and your needs and how similar they are to other people to really get a sense for whether this is there or not. And that is part of the, like, you know, you don't have 100,000 people using this product yet. You might not even have 20 people using this product yet, but is the experience that you're imagining actually solving a hard enough problem, or is it honestly just a niche case? And so then the other flip side of that on fuzzy data is maybe the analytics that you have, like, they just don't tell the whole story, and they can't because the thing you need to test is not going to be there. Can you decompose the information that you do have sufficiently and correlate it to something else to try and understand some strong enough pieces? And that marrying of the qualitative experience and the quantitative understanding is a large part of why I think PM is so fascinating.
Thank you, Mick.
Hi. Hi. This is me. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I would like to ask a question. In order for a product to grow really fast, does A/B testing method always necessary?
It's not necessary. But you often need some type of quantitative evaluation, right? For products that go really fast, I mean really fast, they typically need to be sticky, as in they have they have a retention rate that's pretty high. Let's say you're talking about a daily product, you probably want DAU over MAU to be at least, 0.6, 0.7, something like that, right? If you know how to look at retention curves, right, which is you have 100 people start on day 0, by day 30, how many of them are still using the product? It's a line that drops like this. The question is, when does it flatten out, and at what level does it flatten out, right? Because that really teaches you, if you get 100, if you acquire 100 users, how many are you going to have after 30 days, and how many of those can you monetize in some way? Can you build a self-funding acquisition cycle? That doesn't require A/B testing. You can do some good things with correlational analysis, right? You can say that, hey, this 100 people joined on this day and it looked like this, and this 100 people joined on that day and it looked like this. One of the experiments I ran with one of my products early on was trying to understand the pricing model. And so we just, for a week, we would set the price to $1, and then the next week we would set the price to $3, and the next week we would set the price to $5. It's not really proper A/B testing. It's not really control and test, but it gave us enough money to realize that, yep, the ideal price for this was $2 a month. But quantitative evaluation, I think, is key, because otherwise you can't dive in and say, oh, 30 people remain, and all of the 30 people who remain had done these 3 things within the first day of using the product. And then you get all of your efforts go to doing that. I don't know if anyone recalls this. I don't know how many of you use Facebook, but until you have 10 friends on Facebook, the only thing you do on Facebook is add 10 friends. That's all you do. They get rid of everything else, because until you have 10 friends on Facebook, Facebook is a terrible product. Now it might be interesting because you can follow, news links and so on, but really understanding, like, what does an engaged, retained user look like, and do all of your efforts into there, because then it grows.
Okay.
Sorry,
okay. Thank you.
I think I cut you off there, but hopefully that helps.
Okay, that helps. Oh, thank you, and I'm sorry I didn't present myself as I was too.
No requirement to. Really appreciate the question.
I'm in Vietnam right now, and I'm actually working for a fintech product as a UX designer. Not really a PM, and I work with the PM, but sometimes for me in the project I feel like the work is very like they overlap a lot, and That's why I think that from my point of view, it's very important for an UX designer to also know how to really, like, the technical part to develop a product as well, like the very technical behind it. It's just my impression. I don't know if this is legit, but yeah, anyway, thank you very much for your answer. Yes.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
And all the best.
We have time, I think, for 2 to 3 more questions. Phoenix, I think you have a next question. Please go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I am Phoenix. I'm current will becoming a student. You already mentioned a bit about the rotational PM that you have to manage before, right? And I know that in Facebook you have the rotational PM program, and in Google you have the associate PM program. So I'm kind of curious, what is the main difference between the two programs for someone who will become a graduate?
So I recommend everyone who's interested in this, go to fbrpms.com. I think that's still the link, and you'll see a bunch of stuff on the Facebook one. That's the one that I know more about. I know that when we designed the Facebook one, we did it for in a couple of ways. We tried to make it shorter, more about fast decision making. So 3 6-month projects as opposed to 2 1-year projects. We explicitly tried to make it that you had to do like multiple aspects of the business. So you had to do at least 1 consumer and 1 non-consumer, like ads or analytics or platform or something, so that you would get exposure. And you had to do 3 different organizations so that you would move around the company and get to know different people and different working styles. Not all of that is true at Google. I think the core piece, though, which is the same, which is to take people without really an experience in product management and help them, grow those skills, is still very much part of it.
Thank you, Mick. On to the next one. Aria, you're next. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Mick. This is Aria from Sydney. So coming from an engineering background, you probably have the temptation to just like jump in and do the problem solving with the engineering team. But as a product manager, you probably need to take a step back. So do you have any kind of tips around, what is a nice balance for that?
Yeah, so different PMs have different almost like secret skills that they use. And so a large part of being a PM is that earned leadership, right? You're scaling yourself, you're helping teams make better decisions. One of the challenges you can find if you're not particularly technical is that the engineering team you work with won't feel like you understand the nuances of the trade-offs that they're suggesting, right? And so having some technical background can help. And so if you've never gotten a computer science degree, at least, doing some programming in some form can help. One thing I used to do is try and get a line of code into any product that we ship. Didn't matter what it was. I'd change a drop shadow in the UI somewhere, right? Or fix a 1 pixel thing, right? Super simple, but just demonstrate that I understand the git commit process or whatever it is that they have to be part of it. I think that I personally don't have as much of the internal drive to go and build it at the big company, but I certainly did at my startup, right? The first version of my startup, I coded the first version of the translation algorithm myself, and it was very hard for me to step back and let people change it. And I think really the only answer is to scale yourself as a leader and let people do it their way, because they will always be better at doing it their way than they are at doing it your way, right? I will also say that for some people, I have known many amazing product managers who cannot write a line of code, but they are exceptionally good at understanding people and understanding trade-offs, and their communication skills are such that they can encourage their engineering team to really frame the trade-off accurately without doing so. So Fiji Simo, who now runs the Facebook app entirely, came in from a quantitative analytics and marketing background, was not really a technical PM at all, and she is one of the most successful people in product that I know.
Cool, thanks, Mick.
Thanks. I think this is the last question, but also one of the top questions we are asked today. What is the best advice you received, and can you share with us?
So one of the things I do is my son's outside the window. That's cute. If folks know a chap called Paul Graham, who founded Y Combinator, he has like a thing that he puts at the top of his to-do list, which is also the thing that I put at the top of my to-do list. And it basically looks at the 5 great regrets that everyone has, right, when they pass away, which is that they weren't true to themselves, they didn't say what they felt, they didn't spend time on being happy, they didn't invest in friendships and family and so on. And so essentially at the very top of my to-do list, I have this thing, which is, speak your truth, be happy, invest in friendships, don't work too hard, right? Because I find that, unless you always keep track of the things that truly matter, and for me, that means like every single day, you will find that you continually make trade-offs that make you less happy, more stressed, more tired, and that always affects your job. It's at its heart that like short-term, long-term trade-off problem, right? Like it always feels like if I just spend another hour on this today, then the project's going to get better. But every meaningful thing that I've done in my life has always been when you take a step back and breathe and say, hey, how am I showing up in this situation? What are the things that really drive me as a person? So like whatever you can do to set aside time to think about the deeper pieces in your life and what is working for you and what is not, it makes the hugest difference. The habit I have now that is necessary and has become possible in coronavirus times is I don't have meetings in the morning and Sunday mornings aside, but I clear all my morning meetings, and that is the time when I can sit down and think and be proactive rather than reactive. And it is one of the best things that I can do.
Thank you. I've seen a lot of positive reaction in the chat right now for your sharing. Thank you, Mick. It's wonderful to connect with you today, and I'm sure the community learned so much from you. We do wish to talk to you soon again, but thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your wisdom, your experience with all of us in Viet UX-PM. And we are a very young community, but we do appreciate your sharing, and we look forward to having another opportunity to connect with you. But also we wish you the best of luck in your life, your health, and your career. I know that your son is waiting outside, so I don't want to keep you so long. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Do you have any last thought or last thing you want to share with us?
No, just thank you, all of you. This is one of my favorite things to do, to be honest. It feels like there are many people on the call who are interested in this domain, passionate about this domain, already in here looking to grow. Honestly, that makes me super happy. And so if I can come on again and chat with folks, I would love to do so. And yeah, just, keep investing in it. I really think this is one of the most fascinating disciplines to work in. I'm so glad I found it. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come and chat with this community. Come on, I'm trying some more Vietnamese. I'm still not good.
On behalf of the community, thank you so much. Come on, Mick. And thank you everyone for joining us today. If you are interested to check out, please go ahead and subscribe our YouTube as well as Facebook group, Viet UX-PM. We look forward to connecting with you soon. So here you go. Bye.
All right. See ya.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mick. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Very much.
Thank you.
See you later.